before we begin this incredible tale, please take a moment to like this video if you're enjoying it. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing Viking stories, and comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Your support means everything to us. Now let's dive into this extraordinary story. The morning mist clung to the rocky shores of Nordheim like the whispered doubts that followed young Torvin wherever he walked. At 17 winters old, he possessed a lean frame of someone who had learned to survive on scraps and determination rather than the generous portions afforded to clan favorites. His auburn hair, unruly despite his attempt to tame it, caught the pale northern light as he hauled fishing nets along the pebbled beach. "Move aside, foundling," growled Gunther, the clan chief's eldest son, shouldering past Torvin with deliberate force. The collision sent the smaller young man stumbling, his carefully gathered driftwood scattering across the stones. These nets belonged to warriors, not orphan refuse. Torvin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Experience had taught him that words only invited more cruelty from those who saw his unknown parentage as a stain upon their proud lineage. Instead, he gathered a scattered kindling with practiced efficiency, ignoring the snickers of Gunther's companions. "One day," muttered old Ingrid, the village healer, as she approached with her morning gathering basket. Her weathered face showed sympathy as she helped Torvin collect the last of his wood. "One day, that boy will learn that strength comes not from noble blood, but from noble heart." Torvin offered her a grateful nod before retreating toward the cliffs that bordered their settlement. Here, among the wind-carved stones and hardy seagrass, he found the solitude that had become his refuge. The endless expanse of gray ocean stretched before him, dotted with the dark shapes of distant islands where legends claimed ancient powers still stirred. As he arranged his kindling for the cooking fire that would warm his meager breakfast, a sound unlike any he had ever heard echoed across the water. It was neither the cry of seabirds nor the crash of waves against stone, but something deeper, more profound, a sound that seemed to resonate within his very bones. The noise came again, and this time Torvin could identify its direction. Beyond the furthest visible island, where the morning haze obscured the horizon, something moved, something vast. For 3 days, the mysterious sounds continued, always at dawn, always from the same distant location. The other villagers dismissed Torvin's observations, too busy with their own concerns to pay attention to the ramblings of an orphan. But curiosity burned within him like the forge fires of the village smithy. On the 4th morning, Torvin made a decision that would change his destiny forever. Before the rest of the village stirred, he dragged his small fishing boat into the surf and began rowing toward the source of the haunting calls. The journey took him farther from shore than he had ever ventured. The familiar coastline of Nordheim grew smaller behind him until it became merely a dark line against the pale sky. His arms ached from the constant pull of the oars, and salt spray stung his eyes, but determination drove him forward. As he rounded a towering sea stack that rose from the depths like a stone giant, Torvin gasped at what lay before him. A hidden inlet, sheltered by high cliffs and accessible only through a narrow channel, opened into a circular lagoon of impossibly clear water. Ancient stone structures lined the shores, not the crude wooden buildings of his village, but elaborate carvings that seemed to tell stories in a language he did not recognize. And there, in the center of the lagoon, lay the source of mysterious sounds. The creature was magnificent beyond description. Its scales caught the morning light, like polished emeralds, each one the size of a warrior's shield. Wings that could span the breadth of 3 longships lay folded against its massive form, and even in repose, the dragon radiated a power that made the air itself seem to shimmer. But what struck Torvin most profoundly was not the beast's size or beauty. It was a heavy iron chains that bound its limbs to the ancient stone pillars. Links thicker than a man's torso held the creature fast, and despite its obvious strength, it made no effort to break free. Instead, it lifted its gray-horned head toward the sky and released another of those bone-deep calls. Not a roar of rage, but lament profound loneliness. Torvin's boat drifted silently into the lagoon, his oars forgotten as he stared in wonder. The dragon's golden eyes fixed upon him, and for a moment that stretched like an eternity, boy and beast regarded each other across the still water. "You're trapped," Torvin whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of waves against stone. The dragon tilted its massive head, as if understanding his words. Then, with movements careful and deliberate despite its size, it lowered its great skull until it almost touched the water's surface, a gesture of acknowledgement of greeting. Fear should have consumed Torvin in that moment. Every story he had ever heard spoke of dragons as destroyers, creatures of fire and fury that brought only death to those who encountered them. But looking into those ancient golden eyes, he saw not malice but intelligence, not rage but resignation. "Who did this to you?" he asked, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. The dragon lifted its head toward the carved stone pillars, then back to Torvin. The message was clear. This imprisonment was older perhaps than memory itself. As the morning sun climbed higher, Torvin found himself rowing closer to the shore of the secret lagoon. He beached his boat on a narrow strip of sand between two carved stones and approached the water's edge. The dragon watched his every movement but made no threatening gestures. Up close, the chains were even more impressive and more heartbreaking. The iron links bore symbols similar to those carved into the stone structures, suggesting they were created by the same ancient hands. But more troubling were the worn grooves in the dragon's scales where the metal had rubbed for countless years, testament to a captivity that had endured far too long. "The elders say dragons are evil," Torvin said, settling cross-legged on the sand. "They say you bring only destruction and sorrow." The dragon's response was to lay its great head upon the stone platform before it, positioning itself at Torvin's eye level. The gesture was so clearly one of peaceful intent that the young man felt his remaining fear evaporate. "But you don't seem evil," he continued, studying the intricate patterns of the creature's scales. "You seem tired." A soft rumble emanated from the dragon's throat, not menacing, but almost conversational. Torvin found himself smiling despite the strangeness of the situation. "I'm tired too," he admitted. "Tired of being alone, tired of being unwanted. Maybe that's why I could hear you when no one else could." The hours passed unnoticed as Torvin remained by the lagoon. He found himself talking to the dragon as he might to a trusted friend, sharing stories of his difficult life in the village, his dreams of acceptance, and his fears of a future that seemed to hold little promise. The dragon listened with an attention that no human had ever shown him, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed almost like responses. As the sun reached its zenith, Torvin realized he should return to the village before his absence was noted, but the thought of leaving this place, leaving this companion, filled him with reluctance. "I'll come back," he promised, rising to brush sand from his clothes. "If you want me to, I'll come back tomorrow." The dragon lifted its head and fixed him with that penetrating golden gaze. Then, in a gesture that made Torvin's heart skip, the great creature slowly, deliberately, lowered its head until its snout nearly touched the young man's outstretched hand. The message was unmistakable. Yes, please return. As Torvin rowed back toward Nordheim, his mind raced with questions and possibilities. He had found something extraordinary, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. But more than that, he had found someone who saw him not as an unwanted orphan, but as a friend worthy of trust and companionship. The dragon's lonely calls no longer seemed like sounds of despair, but invitations. Invitations to a friendship that would change both their lives forever. 3 weeks had passed since Torvin first discovered the secret lagoon, and the hidden visits had become the cornerstone of his existence. Each dawn found him rowing through the mist-shrouded waters, his small boat cutting silently through the waves toward his extraordinary companion. The dragon, whom he begun calling Drachmer in his private thoughts, had revealed layers of intelligence and personality that defied every legend Torvin had ever heard. The creature understood complex ideas, responded to questions with deliberate gestures, and had even begun to anticipate Torvin's arrival, positioning itself near the water's edge each morning. On this particular dawn, however, something was different. As Torvin rounded the familiar sea stack, he noticed that Drachmer was not in his usual position. Instead, the dragon stood as upright as his chains would allow, his great head turned toward the narrow entrance of the lagoon. His posture radiated alertness, even concern. "What is it?" Torvin called softly as he guided his boat into the sheltered waters. "What's wrong?" Drachmer's golden eyes fixed upon him with unusual intensity. The dragon extended his neck toward one of the ancient carved pillars, then back to Torvin, repeating the gesture several times. Following the dragon's indication, Torvin beached his boat and approached the stone structure. What he found there made his breath catch in his throat. The intricate carvings, which he had admired for their artistic beauty, suddenly revealed themselves to be more than mere decoration. They were a story, told in symbols and images that seemed to pulse with meaning in the morning light. The first panel showed a figure that looked remarkably like Torvin himself. Young, slight of build, standing alone while others turned away. The second depicted the same figure approaching a chained dragon. But it was the third panel that made Torvin's hands tremble as he traced the ancient stone. It showed the young man's hand touching the dragon's chains, and where flesh met iron, the metal began to crack and crumble. "This can't be right," Torvin whispered, but even as he spoke, he felt a strange tingling in his fingertips, as if power flowed just beneath his skin. Drakmer made a low, encouraging sound, and when Torvin looked back at his companion, the dragon had positioned his massive head as close to the nearest chain as possible. The golden eyes held an expression of hope, so profound it was almost heartbreaking. "You think I can free you?" Torvin asked, his voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of waves. The dragon's response was to lower his great head in the gesture Torvin had come to recognize as a definitive yes. Heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror, Torvin approached the nearest chain anchor. The iron link was cold beneath his palm, its surface covered with the accumulated rust and corrosion of centuries. But as his fingers made contact with the metal, warmth began to spread from his touch. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It felt as if liquid starlight was flowing through his veins, pooling in his hands, eager to be released. The chain grew warmer beneath his touch, and hairline cracks began to appear in the ancient iron. "By the gods!" Torvin breathed, snatching his hand back in shock. Drakmer rumbled softly, a sound of encouragement and reassurance. The dragon's eyes held no fear, only hope and something that looked remarkably like trust. Steeling himself, Torvin placed both hands on the chain link. This time, he didn't pull away when the strange energy began to flow. The warmth increased, spreading up his arms until his entire body hummed with power he had never known he possessed. The ancient iron couldn't withstand the mysterious force. With a sound like thunder, the massive link shattered, its fragments falling into the clear water with metallic splashes that echoed off the lagoon walls. Drakmer's joy was immediate and overwhelming. The dragon lifted his head toward the sky and released a sound that was part roar, part song, a cry of triumph and liberation that seemed to shake the very stones of the ancient structures. But one broken link, while significant, was not enough to free the mighty creature. 3 more chains bound him to the stone pillars, each one requiring the same mysterious power that Torvin was only beginning to understand. "Can you wait a little longer?" Torvin asked, his hands tingling with residual energy. "Breaking that one chain exhausted me more than I expected." Drakmer's response was patient, understanding. He had waited centuries. A few more hours meant nothing compared to the promise of eventual freedom. As Torvin rested on the sandy shore, recovering from his first use of the strange ability, he found himself studying the remaining carved panels. The story they told became clearer with each viewing. The young man who freed the dragon went on to achieve great things, not through conquest or violence, but through courage and compassion. But it was the final panel that gave Torvin pause. It showed the same young man, older now, standing at the edge of a great precipice. The dragon was beside him, no longer chained, but the man's face bore an expression of sad acceptance, as if he knew something the viewer did not. "What happens to me?" Torvin asked aloud, though he expected no answer. Drakmer, however, seemed to understand the question. The dragon's great head swung toward the final carving, then back to Torvin. For the first time since their friendship began, the golden eyes held a shadow of sorrow. Torvin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air, but he pushed the feeling aside. Whatever the future held, it was worth the risk to free a creature that had been imprisoned for so long. Over the following days, Torvin returned again and again to Lagoon, each time breaking another of the ancient chains. With each link destroyed, his understanding of the strange power within him grew stronger, but so did his awareness of its cost. The energy seemed to draw from his very life force, leaving him pale and exhausted after each use. Drakmar watched these transformations with growing concern, sometimes refusing to allow Torvin to continue when the young man's strength seemed too depleted. The dragon's care and protection touched Torvin deeply, confirming his belief that their friendship was worth any sacrifice. On the 7th day of his efforts, Torvin approached the final chain. This one was different from the others. Thicker, darker, covered with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed directly. Breaking it would require more power than all the previous attempts combined. "This is it," Torvin said, placing his hands on the ominous metal. "After this, you'll be free." Drakmar's response surprised him. Instead of the eager anticipation he expected, the dragon seemed hesitant, almost reluctant. The great creature's eyes held a mixture of longing and regret that Torvin couldn't fully interpret. "What's wrong?" Torvin asked. "Don't you want to be free?" The dragon's golden gaze moved from the chain to Torvin's face, then to the carved stone panels that told their story. The message was clear. Freedom would come at a price that perhaps was too high to pay. But Torvin's mind was made up. His friend had suffered in captivity for centuries, and no cost was too great to end that suffering. Closing his eyes, he summoned every ounce of mysterious power within him and directed it into the final chain. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Light blazed from his hands, so bright it turned the lagoon into a miniature sun. The chain didn't just break. It disintegrated. Its iron molecules scattered to the wind like dark snow. The moment the final link dissolved, Drakmar's transformation was remarkable. The dragon rose to his full, magnificent height, his scales seeming to glow with inner fire, his wings spreading wide for the first time in ages beyond counting. He was beautiful, terrible, and completely, utterly free. But as Torvin collapsed to his knees, drained by the enormous effort, he noticed something that filled him with wonder and no small amount of concern. Drakmar, despite his newfound freedom, despite the open sky above and the endless ocean beyond, made no move to leave the lagoon. Instead, the great dragon approached Torvin's fallen form and, with infinite gentleness, lowered his massive head until it rested on the sand beside the exhausted young man. The gesture was one of devotion, of loyalty, of a bond forged not through magic or prophecy, but through friendship and sacrifice. "You're free," Torvin whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "You can go anywhere now." Drakmar's response was to shift closer, one enormous wing extending to shelter Torvin from the morning sun. The message was unmistakable. The dragon's place was here, with a friend who had given so much to secure his freedom. As Torvin drifted into recuperative sleep, he dimly heard the sound he had come to associate with Drakmar's contentment. Not the lonely calls that had first drawn him to this place, but a deep, rumbling purr that spoke of peace, gratitude, and unbreakable bonds. The prophecy carved in stone was fulfilled. The orphan had freed the dragon, and in doing so, had gained not just a companion, but a friend whose loyalty would transcend time itself. But as the ancient symbols had warned, every act of great magic comes with consequences, and Torvin's greatest trials were yet to come. Years would pass before the full meaning of the ancient carvings became clear. Torvin and Drakmar would indeed go on to become legends, their friendship inspiring songs and stories across the northern lands. The young man who had been rejected by his own clan would find acceptance and honor beyond his wildest dreams, and the dragon who had known only captivity would soar free across skies that had been denied to him for centuries. But the final panel's prophecy proved true as well. The power that allowed Torvin to break the ancient chains came with a price that could not be avoided. Each use shortened his mortal life, trading years for moments of extraordinary ability. When the end came, it found them as it had always found them, together. Drakmar remained by his friend's side until the very last, and when Torvin finally closed his eyes for the final time, he did so with the knowledge that he had lived a life of purpose, friendship, and unshakable loyalty. The dragon mourned as only dragons can mourn, long, deeply, and with sorrow that echoed across the northern seas. But he also celebrated, for he had known true friendship, and that bond would endure long after the physical world had claimed its due. In the hidden lagoon where their friendship began, a new carving appeared on the ancient stones, one that spoke not of prophecy or destiny, but the simple truth that the greatest magic of all is the love between true friends, and that some bonds transcend even death itself. the end of one story, but the beginning of a legend that would inspire hearts for generations to come.